There is a map. It is old. Older than most nations. Older than the printing press. Drawn on the skin of a gazelle. It sits today behind museum glass, catalogued, studied, and largely ignored by the wider world. But if you trace the edges of the continent drawn in its lower corner, something shifts inside you. Because that continent, that precise, coastline-accurate rendering of a landmass at the bottom of the world, should not exist. It could not exist. Not in 1513. Not according to everything we were taught about who discovered what, and when, and how. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820. Every history book says so. Every classroom confirms it. And yet here, 5 centuries before that moment, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis drew its coastline, with detail, with accuracy, with a precision that even modern satellite imaging has had to respect. So the question is not whether the map exists. It does. The question, the one that keeps researchers awake at night, is this: who taught him? Welcome to the Vault of Secrets. Let us begin not with the map. Let us begin with what the map implies. Because the Piri Reis Map is not an isolated artifact. It is not a single anomaly sitting alone in history like a misfiled document. It is one of at least 10 ancient maps. 10 separate documents, from different cultures, across different centuries, that appear to show Antarctica. Not approximately, not symbolically, but geographically. Coastlines, bays, mountain ridges buried under miles of ice that we only confirmed existed in the 20th century using sonar and radar. Features we could not have known without technology that did not exist until the modern era. And yet, they are there, drawn with confidence, as if whoever made them had simply looked, as if they had sailed those waters, as if they had stood on shores that today lie under 2 kilometers of frozen silence. The implications of this are not small. They reach into the foundation of something we have long assumed about ourselves, about the story of human civilization, about who came before, and about what we have been allowed to remember. Let us start with Piri Reis, because his map is the one most people have encountered. Officially, the explanation is elegant and reassuring. Piri Reis was an accomplished Ottoman admiral who compiled his 1513 map from a collection of older sources, possibly including charts captured from Christopher Columbus, charts that Columbus may have obtained from undisclosed sources during his voyages. The map shows the Atlantic with impressive accuracy. It shows portions of South America and Africa aligned in ways that suggest real geographic knowledge. And then in the bottom section, there it is. A large landmass hugging the lower edge of the map, labeled in a way that suggests the cartographer considered it a distinct, significant continent. Mainstream scholarship has offered 2 explanations. First, that it represents a speculative southern continent, the theoretical terra australis that ancient Greek philosophers proposed must exist to balance the northern land masses. Second, that it depicts South America's coastline stretched and distorted due to projection errors. Both are professionally defensible. But here is what makes this strange. In 1960, a cartographer working for the United States Navy, Captain Lorenzo Burroughs, examined the Piri Reis map using the Mercator projection and found that the supposed terra australis matched the subglacial topography of Antarctica, not the surface of Antarctica as we see it today, buried under ice. The rock, the land beneath the ice, the actual geological coastline that no human had mapped, officially, until Operation High Jump in the late 1940s. Captain Burroughs wrote in his official evaluation that the accuracy of the depiction was difficult to explain through conventional cartographic tradition. That evaluation was filed. And then the conversation, largely, moved on. Because if Burroughs was right, even partially, then the source material Piri Reis used was not theoretical, it was observational. Someone, at some point before 1513, had sailed close enough to Antarctica's actual coastline to record what they saw with enough precision that 5 centuries later, when we finally developed the technology to see through the ice ourselves, the shapes matched. That is not a small thing. That is an extraordinary thing. And it becomes even more extraordinary when you discover that the Piri Reis Map is not alone. The Orontius Phineas Map of 1531 is perhaps even more unsettling. Where the Piri Reis Map could be argued as a distorted appendage of South America, the Orontius Phineas Map is unambiguous. It shows a large continent at the South Pole. It shows it with mountain ranges, with river systems, with a clearly differentiated interior and coastline. And it places this continent, in terms of size, shape, and polar positioning, in a configuration strikingly consistent with what Antarctica looks like under its ice. The map even shows what appear to be ice-free coastal regions that glaciologists have confirmed were indeed ice-free during periods of warmer climate thousands of years ago. Officially, scholars classify it as a product of Renaissance speculation about the southern hemisphere, influenced by classical theories of continental balance. That explanation may be entirely correct. But then you look at the rivers, not rough, vague gestures toward inland geography, actual river systems, with tributaries and drainage basins, depicted with a specificity that pure speculation rarely produces. Pure imagination tends toward the dramatic and the symmetrical. This map is neither. It has the imprecision of something observed and recorded imperfectly, rather than the clean symmetry of something invented. That is where the story shifts. Consider what it would take to invent that map from scratch. You would need to speculate your way into producing a document that, 4 centuries later, corresponds closely to seismic and sonar data gathered by modern scientific expeditions. That is statistically possible. But it strains something in the mind when you look at the map directly and ask yourself honestly what it looks like it is showing you. The Haji Ahmed map of 1559 adds another layer. This Ottoman document shows the world with geographic sophistication that surprises historians who encounter it for the first time. In its southern regions, there again appears a large landmass depicted with coastal features and interior elevation that correspond, in general terms, to Antarctic geography. What distinguishes the Haji Ahmed map is its treatment of what appears to be a land bridge between South America and Antarctica, a feature that, according to modern geology, did once exist. The Drake Passage, the body of water that now separates the tip of South America from the Antarctic Peninsula, was formed through tectonic separation. Before that separation, there was connection. And there are people in the academic community who have quietly noted the possibility that the map tradition underlying documents like the Haji Ahmed chart may reflect a geographic knowledge base that predates the current Antarctic ice sheet, knowledge that survived through cartographic tradition even as the memory of how it was obtained faded entirely from cultural consciousness. Now pause here, because this is the moment where the conversation must expand beyond cartography. Think about what you know about knowledge, about how it is preserved, transmitted, and sometimes lost. Think about the Library of Alexandria, not as mythology, but as historical fact. It existed, it burned, and with it went, according to the scholars who wrote about it in the ancient world, a significant portion of the accumulated knowledge of civilizations that came before. What was in it? We do not know with certainty. We know it was large. We know it was comprehensive. We know that ancient scholars traveled from across the known world to study there. And we know that certain texts and maps housed there were copied before the fires, and those copies were copied again, and the copies traveled through the Islamic world, into the Ottoman libraries, onto the desks of cartographers like Piri Reis, who wrote explicitly in the notes accompanying his map that he had used ancient source charts he described as being of great age, charts that had traveled through hands he could only partially trace. He said this himself. He documented it. And yet that admission tends to get quietly set aside in favor of the more comfortable explanation. The Philippe Buache map of 1737 introduces something that should, by any reasonable measure, stop the conversation entirely and force a complete re-examination. Buache was a French geographer working in the 18th century, and his map of the southern polar region shows Antarctica divided into 2 land masses separated by a central channel. For much of the 20th century, This was considered a strange error from a pre-discovery era. Then seismic surveys of the Antarctic ice sheet revealed that the continent does in fact consist of two major land masses separated by a subglacial channel, completely hidden under the current ice. Buache showed the channel. He drew it. He placed it in approximately the correct position relative to the overall shape of the continent. He did this more than 80 years before Antarctica was officially discovered and more than 200 years before we had the technology to see through its ice. The mainstream response has been that Buache was working from incomplete speculative sources and got lucky. That is one interpretation. The other, the one that some serious researchers have advanced, is that Buache, like Piri Reis before him, was working from source material based on direct observation. Material that recorded the continent before the ice reached its current depth. Material that preserved, through some chain of transmission we have not yet reconstructed, the geographic knowledge of someone who was actually there. And this is where we must ask the question the maps seem to be building toward. Not whether Antarctica was observed before 1820. The evidence for that possibility is, at minimum, serious enough to warrant genuine investigation. The deeper question is this: when? Because if the subglacial features on these maps reflect the continent as it appeared before the current ice sheet fully formed, we are not talking about an alternate Renaissance history. We are talking about something that reaches back much further. Geologists have studied the Antarctic ice sheet extensively. The current ice depth, the ice that buries the coastline features these maps appear to show, began accumulating in its current form roughly 12,000 years ago. 12,000 years. That is the same period during which the great mythological floods appear in cultures across the world. The same period marking the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene. The same period during which, in every history book ever printed, humanity was supposed to be living in small, scattered groups, hunting and gathering, entirely without the navigation technology or the organizational capacity to sail to the edges of the world and map what they found there. Every map we have discussed tonight was drawn in the 16th, 17th, or 18th century. But their accuracy, their correspondence to geographic features buried under ice, suggests their underlying source data is far older. How much older? That is the part no institution wants to answer. Because the answer, if it is what several serious researchers have quietly proposed, does not merely complicate our timeline. It rewrites it. It suggests the existence of a maritime civilization, sophisticated, geographically ambitious, technically capable, that existed before the ice sealed Antarctica's coastline, before the floods reshaped the world's shorelines, and before the history we were given begins. A civilization whose maps survived, whose knowledge traveled, whose observations outlasted the culture that made them, and whose existence, if acknowledged, would require us to ask why we do not know about them, and then, more uncomfortably, to ask whether the reason we do not know is partly because we have not been looking. Charles Hapgood, a professor at Keene State College, published a detailed academic study in 1966 titled Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, in which he argued with careful cartographic analysis that the Piri Reis and other ancient maps could only be explained by reference to a prehistoric source civilization with advanced navigational and geographic knowledge. His work was reviewed and praised in a private letter by Albert Einstein. It was also largely dismissed by mainstream archaeology, not on the basis of rigorous counter-analysis, but on the basis that its conclusions were too radical to accommodate within the existing framework. Hapgood's response to that dismissal is worth sitting with. He wrote that a conclusion should not be rejected because it is surprising. It should be rejected because the evidence does not support it. And the evidence, in his estimation, did support it. That argument has never been fully answered. It has only been ignored, which is a different thing entirely. The remaining maps in this collection, the Zeno map of 1380, which shows Greenland's subglacial topography with accuracy not achieved again until modern survey. The Andrea Benincasa map of 1508, which shows coastal features in the southern hemisphere corresponding to no known landmass other than Antarctica, the Dulcert Portolano of 1339, with its strangely precise depiction of coastlines implying a survey tradition far older than its stated date. Each adds another thread to the same pattern. Individually, they are anomalies. Together, they form a record. Incomplete, fragmented, transmitted through layers of copying and reinterpretation, but a record nonetheless. A record of something that came before. Something that saw the world in its earlier configuration. Something that mapped it. And something that, for reasons we have not established, left no other trace except the maps. As if the maps were all that survived. As if they were, in some quiet and persistent way, trying to tell us something. We have walked tonight through 10 documents that, by every rational measure, require an explanation we have not yet been given. We have not claimed certainty. Certainty, in the absence of the physical evidence that ocean sediment, ice cores, and deep-water archaeology might one day provide, would be premature. What we have claimed is that the official explanation, speculation, lucky guessing, cartographic error repeated across unrelated cultures and centuries, is insufficient. That insufficiency is not a fringe position. It is the position of several credentialed cartographers, geographers, and historians who have examined the primary documents and found the mainstream account wanting. Their work exists. Their arguments are detailed. Their evidence is physical. They have not been answered. They have been ignored. And the difference between those two things is the space where real inquiry lives. What do you do with that? That is ultimately a question each viewer must answer for themselves. We are not here to tell you what to believe. We are here to show you what the maps show, to walk you through what the analysis reveals, to give you access to the information that, for various institutional reasons, does not tend to find its way into textbooks. Because here is what we have come to believe at the Vault of Secrets. The most important intellectual act a person can perform is to look directly at the evidence and ask, without anxiety about what the answer might mean, whether the story we have been given accounts for it. Not whether the alternative is comfortable, whether the evidence fits. And in the case of these 10 maps, drawn across 5 centuries by cartographers from multiple cultures who had no communication with one another, the evidence does not fit neatly into the story we have been told. It fits into something older, something that was there before the ice, something we are only beginning, slowly and with significant resistance, to look for. If this kind of thinking matters to you, if you believe that honest engagement with difficult evidence is more valuable than comfortable certainty, then you are in the right place. This channel exists for exactly that purpose. Subscribe. Not because you agree with everything presented here, but because you want to keep asking. Because you understand that the most dangerous thing a curious mind can do is stop. The next map we examine may be the one that changes everything, or it may simply open the next question. Either way, the looking is the point. Stay with us.